Hi, this is Sean D'Souza, and you're listening to the 3-Month Vacation Podcast. This podcast isn't some magic trick about how to work less. Instead, it's about how to really enjoy the work that you do and to enjoy your vacation time. Hi, I'm Sean, and you're listening to the 3-Month Vacation. In 2009, I flew to Chicago to speak at an event for free, and I made $20,000. If you're a professional, there's a good chance that someone will ask you to do something for free, which puts us all in a bit of a pickle. Should we respond with an outright no, or should the answer be yes? And perhaps there is a middle ground that we all need to explore. But invariably, all of these questions are irrelevant until you ask yourself a single question. What's in it for you? To explore this topic a bit, let's look at 3 points. The first is how to frame the WIIFM, which is what's in it for me, and how to answer that as correctly as possible. The second one is how to make sure that you get paid. And finally, the $20,000 story, in how you can negotiate from free to getting paid. As usual, we start out with the first one, which is how to frame the WIIFM. What's in it for me? That's the question that you need to frame and answer it as correctly as possible. For the past 3 years, I've done an annual event absolutely free. I want to call it free, but in reality, it costs us money. We have to fly to another country, and there are internal travel and food costs involved. Which means that even though part of the travel and the hotel stays are covered, we end up spending money. The audience that we speak to is quite small, often fewer than those that show up on one of our webinars. And that audience is not always a suitable match for our business. Does this sound like a bad deal to you? If you look at it from a time and money point of view, it's not ideal. And the reason I make this trip is because it gets me out of the office and I get to meet with other speakers. There has been minimal economic gain, and whatever little we've earned has been cancelled out by the travel costs. Even so, until now, it has made perfect sense to speak without charging a cent. The singular most important question is WIIFM, which is what's in it for me. And my benchmarks have usually been point 1, a new place to visit, point 2, people I might not have usually met, and point 3, an economic gain of some kind. Yet, when I started, none of these benchmarks mattered because I was an average speaker. I needed a lot of practice, which is why I'd willingly seek out every possible free speaking engagement that I could find. Usually, they were small clubs, they were networking groups, they were local events. And they expected little of the speaker, which suited me just fine. I could practice my speech, I could watch the pacing, I could see where the audience laughed, where they objected, and I could fix things accordingly. My goal was to get an incredible amount of live practice. The practice is what you're likely to need as well. And you might have heard me saying, hey, don't do anything for free. People need to pay you. But that's not always practical advice. If you think of all of these assignments as a course, then suddenly your mindset changes. Because what happens in a course? In a course, you pay money in advance, and then you have to do a whole bunch of assignments, and nobody's paying you for those assignments. You're paying to do those assignments. You're paying to learn. If you look at it like that, in that manner, suddenly the whole thing is shifted around, and now you are learning something. It's all very fine to get these inspirational speeches from experts that tell you, wait a second, you should not do anything for free. it's not a good idea, but they're in a better position right now. Everyone at some point in their life has done stuff for free, and that's just how you get started. Which is how I got started as well in advertising. I was just out of university, and I'd done some shoddy but very official sounding advertising course. It taught me little or nothing, and yes, I had a degree in commerce and accounting, but not a shred of work experience in the advertising field. So all the people in the course, we disbanded, and then we went out looking for jobs. And some of them got jobs in very small agencies, but I decided I wanted to go for a much bigger agency, a more reputed agency. And so I went to all the big agencies and I offered to work for free. And the job I got was at Leo Burnett, Chaitra Leo Burnett. My pitch was something like this. It was, how about I work for a month free of cost, and if you like me and I like you, then we can continue. That's what I told the creative director, Tanaz Kalyaniwala, and she said yes. So I was lucky, and she was more than open to such a strange proposition, because at that point in time I was just a cartoonist. I had no portfolio. I had just this bunch of cartoons stuck in a little exercise book which looked horrid anyway, but she said yes. And that's the whole point of free. At some level, it is cheap in the sense that you have no worth, but at the other level, it is a proposition. And people stop and think about it for a second. When we go out there, we see ourselves as extremely valuable, and it's very good to have that ego, but from the other person's point of view, they definitely see you as a beginner. You're more likely to get in the way, you're more likely to goof up, you're more likely to be embarrassing the person that took you on. And at this point, it seems like the people are doing you a favor when you offer your services free of cost. And I think that's just the way to look at an opportunity. When you're starting in any field, people are taking a chance on you. And from your point of view, you need to look at WIIFM. What's in it for me? Every time I've done something free, I've always looked at what's in it for me. I might not have charged anything, but there is definitely that payoff. Somewhere there is the payoff. Not all of them have to translate into money, but there is a payoff. So ask yourself, what's in it for me? And if you have enough of a reason, and especially if you're learning the ropes, then go ahead and treat it as a course. Treat it as a learning experiment. Treat it like an assignment that you have to complete and that you didn't have to pay any fees for. Even so, as is evident, offering yourself for free can only go so far. When do you cut the cord? When do you start charging? In other words, when is free unacceptable? And this takes us to the second part, where we look at how to make sure that you get paid. Let's say you've been invited to speak on 15 very popular podcasts. What is your reaction? It's more likely that you'll be quite excited, even if the podcasts were about an hour long. And you realize where this train of thought is going, don't you? Not one of those podcasts is likely to pay you for your time. Your expectation is, oh, wait a second, they'll go to their audience, they have a big audience, and that podcast will be heard, and then people come to my website, and you go through this entire thought process, and you do that speaking for free. But you and I know it's all a thought process based on pure conjecture. Yet if someone asked you to put in 15 hours of work and they said, listen, we're not going to pay you, you'd think they're completely crazy. Which kind of brings up the question, what makes one kind of situation suitable for payment, whereas the second one can remain unpaid? And what is it that makes us resent one assignment while wholly embracing the other? The answer falls into two basic categories, money and time. While working for free is perfectly okay when you're getting your act together, the biggest reason why you're in business is because you want more control over your life. Without money and without time, even the finest business plans go veering off into the ditch. which is why you need to be paid for your effort. Let's take an example of giving a presentation. If you've ever been contacted by someone to give a presentation, you've probably been asked to do it for a pittance or maybe free. Maybe they'll throw in some travel fee, maybe they'll put you up in a hotel. Yet, as you look around you, you'll notice there are other speakers, probably at your level, that are being paid. Why does such a double standard seem to exist? The answer often lies in the way that you're presenting yourself. When I was starting out in business, I too got a dime a dozen speaking engagements, and they were all unpaid. However, during the same period, I was also being paid a small sum of $1,500 to speak at events. How is it possible that you can be paid and be expected to speak free of charge at the same time? And the answer lies in almost any big-name author website, for example. If you look at David Epstein's website, and he's an author of many books, including Range, his newest book, and if you want him to be a speaker at your event, you have to get in touch with Holly Goulet. Who's Holly Goulet? She's the Senior Vice President of APB Speakers. Once again, you realize where this is going, right? If you end up on appspeakers.com, you're going to be faced with a form, and then you're asked about your budget, which starts at around $7,500 and ends at $100,000. If you want to be paid as a speaker, and I did, you need to go where people look for paid speakers. It seems pretty obvious when you think about it, but anyone directly contacting you is very likely to be expecting you to do a favor of sorts. At Psychotactics, we have cartoons all over our site. You'd think it would be rude or even unacceptable for someone to write in and ask if they could use our cartoons free of charge. And yet people write in and they ask you whether they can use your cartoon on their website, on their brochure, on their leaflets. It's very good of them to ask, but they still expect it to be free. It took time to create that cartoon. It took a lot of skill. It took a lot of resources. You have to have an iPad or a computer or something like that. So it's not something that just gets given away just for some credit. And if it sounds like I'm mad about it, I'm not. I've got so many requests for just the cartoons, and I know that credit doesn't pay the bills. If you want to get paid for certain things, you have to, at some level, be connected with some sort of agency. To get paid for speaking, I got in touch with a speaking agency. To get paid for my cartoons, I did something similar. I signed up with an illustration agency, and I didn't get paid superstar sums as I was still very much an unknown quantity. But I got paid well enough to keep the home fires burning. There might be many situations, however, where signing up to an agency would be slightly bizarre. Maybe you're a graphic designer or a web designer or an arborist. You're not going to an agency to get that work. Nonetheless, you will have to fend off this question, will you do this for free? By having a charge next to the products, right next to the services that you provide, you're already doing this fending off. Many of us aren't sure about how much we will charge. I mean, how are you going to decide how much a website costs? You have to know what they want, what are the parameters that you're working with. You have to know all of those details, but there will be smaller things that you can do, and you can put prices alongside that. And that gives a very clear understanding that if we're going to charge for small things, we are going to charge for bigger things. And therefore, you're sending out a signal that you're charging for your services and your products. In short, if you want to get paid, you can't rant and rail about why people are not paying you. You have to position yourself in the right places in the first instance. You might believe that you're just starting out and no one will hire you. And when you're looking for places to represent you, maybe a top-notch agency is going to say no, because obviously they have these standards, but a smaller agency might say yes. They'll put you on your roster. And as clients go to your websites, they will see that they have to contact an agency. And that alone will give you a bit of a boost in the client's eyes, because now they know that you're more of a hotshot than they expected. You would think that a price is a deterrent, but often that's what we expect. We expect to pay for stuff and we expect to pay more for the better stuff. So once a client sees that, there's a greater chance that you will get paid than if you just put something on your website. And yes, you can still go on podcasts and speak absolutely free. That is entirely your call. Yet there are times when you aren't likely to get paid and you can't justify doing things for free either. That's when you need to go in between and you need to pull out your negotiation handbook, because you're going to have to stretch the rules a little bit, or at least move them around a bit. Let's find out how you can handle non-paid situations and still get paid. I was voted the best speaker at an event 3 times in a row. And the 4th time, I didn't get invited back. In 2009, I knew I had to make a very long trip yet again to a far-off land. Yes, America. The event was closer to the east coast of the US, which meant that I had to fly 12 hours to San Francisco, stop over, and then a further 3 or 4 hours of travel. It had been my 3rd trip to this event, and I was excited to get to my destination. Now, this was one of those really nice events where it was extremely well marketed, and in the audience there were about 200 to 250 attendees. However, there were also some downsides. The airfare was not being covered, neither was the hotel stay or the food. The organizer allowed us to sell our products or services from the stage, but he also took 50% off the sales as a commission. In short, it was heavily tipped in his direction. And somehow we had to hope that we would recover our costs and make a decent profit as well. This event wasn't the first one with such conditions either. I'd spoken once in Australia when I barely made the money that we spent. I'd also spoken in the US before at different events right through the US, in San Francisco, in Chicago, and then on the East Coast. And yet, here I was again for the 3rd time in a row. However, until that point, I did believe that to some extent I was still in training and that all of those free events were money well spent. But at the end of the 3rd year, I decided, let's do a deal. When you're starting, it's hard to decide between free and fee. But there is an in-between mode too, and it's called a deal, as you'd expect. And there's no prescribed formula, as every situation is different. However, if you're dealing with someone that is not going to pay you at any cost, then what you need to strike is an in-between bargain. In the case of the speaking engagement, I had a bit of leverage. I had been voted the best speaker for 3 years in a row, so I asked the organizer whether he would pick up the travel costs for Renuka and me. And he said he'd think about it, and I said, look, if you're not agreeable to that condition, then can I at least keep 100% of the sales just to cover my costs? The travel costs were about $3,500. And he must have spoken to someone within the organization and decided, okay, we'll forget the 50% that you're going to pay us as commission. You just do it and you keep whatever you need to keep. It turned out to be a slight misjudgment because we sold approximately $20,000 worth of products and services from the stage on that day. And that seems like a lot. And it's a good payday no matter how you look at it. But we'd done our groundwork. We had spoken at many events. We had bombed badly. We'd learned the ropes of speaking. We'd learned how to sell and then how to negotiate. So there's always room for negotiation. At speaking engagements, you could ask to sell something or to have an extra table where you can demonstrate your products. You could work out a pre-call or a pre-webinar where clients tune in to listen or to watch you, and so they're warmed up to you before the event. And if you're not in speaking, then there are things that you could ask for as a barter. When I first started out, I'd draw cartoons free of charge in exchange for really good and costly books from a publisher. sometimes you can negotiate. You don't always have to be paid in cash. And sometimes you need to weigh up your options and see what you have to lose and potentially what you have to gain. The organizers are no dummies. They know that people have to eat. They know that they have to get clients. They know that there has to be some economic gain. And yet, there may be times when you can't think of what to ask for. In such a condition, simply put the decision-making in the organizer's camp. Tell the organizer that we're all professionals and there has to be some value in it for everyone. Ask what they can do for you. Don't ramble when you ask this question. Just keep it down to a single line. What could you do to make it a fair deal? And it might be that they're unreasonable. They might just say, no, we're not going to pay anything. We're not going to give you anything. In which case, you sit on your high horse too. However, in many cases, they're likely to come halfway, or at least part of the way, at which point the negotiation doesn't need to die. You can still push for a little more if needed. You can start off with one bit and then add another bit later. There's always scope for negotiation. But shouldn't they pay you anyway? They do pay for everything else: electricity, petrol, rent, airfares. There's no bargain there, is there? No, there isn't. And people pay for certain things and then they want other stuff free. And you have to make that choice. You can either get some sort of barter, some sort of deal, some sort of negotiation which is to your benefit, or you just decide to stay at home. At Psychotactics, we did many deals when we were growing up. We don't do that now. If I do something free, it's because I'm doing a favor for a friend. Even so, I will still ask them to pick up the costs. However, I think that it's important not to simply think of payment as a black and white issue. A big shot on YouTube might tell you that you have to be paid to be a professional. That's true, but it's also black and white. Look at the grays too. There's a lot of gains in between as well, and those grays may well pay the bills after all. And with that, we come to the end of this episode. What did we cover? Let's look at the three things. The first thing is how to frame the what's in it for me question and how to answer it as correctly as possible. For me, it's about meeting speakers. For me, it's about going to a different place. So it depends on what's in it for you. If you're starting out, a lot of it might just be to get practice, to get the exposure, to be comfortable in front of, say, 200 people, if they have 200 people. Whatever the circumstances are, you have to decide, wait a second, I'm learning this stuff, and this is good for me. Good for me personally, good for me as a brand, and that's what you have to decide. The second thing is how to make sure that you get paid. And in many industries, having an agent is a very cool thing. Maybe you're not going to get a top-notch agency, but someone at a lower level will probably take you on, and you won't get paid a lot, but you will get paid. And that's crucial. That's critical because as your prices keep going up, you then can move to the next section and the next section and probably end up in the top-notch agency. In some industries, that's not going to happen, but even on your website, when you put in those prices for smaller products and smaller services, it gives an indication of what has to be paid for the bigger thing, or at least that you're not going to end up doing stuff absolutely free, that there will be a price to pay. And the final thing is the $20,000 story. It's the only $20,000 story I have. But there are many other side stories which don't have these big numbers on them, and we've negotiated along the way. We've got this or that or something and the other. And there are ways in which you can negotiate. I'm sure you have enough creative energy to work out what you need and how you need to go about it. Which brings us to the one thing that you can do today. I think the one thing that you need to do today is to work out what's in it for you. It's dead easy to think of it just in terms of money. And, especially when you're struggling with money, that's kind of the thing that's on your mind all the time. But even later on, when you're okay, It's money that's on your mind. And therefore, think of it in another aspect. What's in it for you? What can you get from that? Maybe it's a connection with other people. Maybe it's something else. There's always something else. So think of it that way. And yes, you have to get paid for your work as well. But don't just throw away the rest of the opportunities. If you think of it from a what's in it for me kind of circumstance, you'll find that there is a lot to be gained in that scenario. And that brings us to the end of this podcast. Let's find out what's happening in Psychotactics land. It's 2020 for us, at least, as in the planning for 2020. And the Info Products course is out on the 25th of Jan. If you want to know how to create an information product that causes clients to read or to consume from one end to the other, then this is the course for you. And the reason for such a product is it's like this podcast. You are listening to it from the start to the finish. And what that does is it builds trust, it builds all of that stuff, and then the client comes back for more. It's like a meal. If you think of it as a meal, what are the chances that a client would have an unfinished meal and then come back to your restaurant? And so that's what the Info Products is all about. There are goodies. You can go to psychotactics.com/info goodies. So you just have to remember the info and the goodies. And that also puts you on the waiting list. We only have 25 copies. So if you want one of those 25 copies, go to psychotactics.com/info goodies. And it's the 25th of Jan. Now, on the 21st of March, we have the article writing live. That's just a sign up. The course starts in May, and this is the toughest writing course in the world. Believe me, it's tough for you and it's tough for me, and you become an outstanding writer. I mean, you can step out and write an article for a magazine or a newspaper just after finishing the course. That's the result that we promise. It's not just information. It's not just, here's how you write an article. No, you actually understand the structure and put everything together. And I'm tweaking your article every single day. So that's the live course on the 21st of March. The bookings will open. I know this sounds very premature in November of 2019, but that's what we do. We pre-sell. So go to psychotactics.com, look for the article writing course, and there you can put your name on the waiting list. You also get some goodies. So that's where we are right now for 2019. You'll get a few podcasts, and then we'll go into reruns as we go off for our summer break, because we're in New Zealand and we have summer in December. As always, your best starting point is 5000 BC, because that's where we discuss stuff. That's where you can get in touch with me, almost like having email back and forth, or chat, whatever you want to call it. But there is a forum. You can ask your question and I give you an answer, and you ask another question, and you can just go on and on like that. I'm not even completing my sentences here, but in 5000 BC, I end up writing whole articles just to answer your question. This podcast, for instance, was the answer to a simple question. And you might be wondering, well, if I get all the answers on the podcast, why would I join 5000 BC? Because you can get to ask your question or your subset of a question or whatever you want and get all the details that you require for your own purposes. So that's 5000bc.com. And that brings us to the end of this podcast. Thanks for listening, and I'll say bye for now. Bye-bye. Still listening? If you're wondering why I didn't get invited back to that event, the one where I was considered the best speaker 3 times in a row, well, the organizer had that event one last time, and frankly, I was puzzled why he didn't invite me. He was a very good friend. He is a very good friend, and not just an organizer. We talk on the phone quite often, just as friends do. And on one of those calls, I asked him why he left me out. Was it because I had hard-nosed the deal was it because I took all the $20,000 and put them in my pocket? And he said, no, he wasn't upset about that. He said, that was the deal we made. I stand by it. I'm okay with it. The reason I didn't call you back was because you were causing havoc with all the other speakers. You would sell so much that they would make little or nothing. They were the ones that were protesting. As you can see, all of their free work wasn't for nothing. I'd used it as my training ground. I got good at my craft, at speaking, at teaching, and selling, which is something that you need to consider as well as you go through your business life. Don't be taken for a ride, but if you're on the ride, learn along the way because your payday is coming down the line. And if you look at life that way and you keep improving and you keep tweaking, that payday is not very far away. I'll see you in 5000 BC and I'll say bye for now. Bye-bye.